Imagine two people who earn the same salary, live in the same city, and face the same economy. One quietly builds wealth, sleeps well at night, and grows freer every year. The other feels constant pressure, makes emotional decisions, and wonders why money always seems to slip through their fingers. The difference is not intelligence, luck, or effort. The difference is mindset. Money does not obey spreadsheets as much as it obeys psychology. It responds less to what you know and more to how you behave when fear, greed, uncertainty, and ego enter the room. This is why some people with modest incomes become wealthy, while others with extraordinary opportunities end up broke. In this video, you are about to discover how money really works inside the human mind, not in theory, but in real life. You will learn why being reasonable beats being rational, why controlling your emotions matters more than predicting markets, and why the biggest financial mistakes are almost never mathematical errors, but behavioral ones. This is not a story about getting rich quick or chasing perfect strategies. It is a story about understanding yourself, because every financial decision you will ever make passes through your beliefs, your fears, and your past experiences. You will hear ideas that challenge common assumptions, ideas that explain why patience is a superpower, why enough is more valuable than more, and why time is the most underestimated force in wealth building. If you have ever wondered why saving feels hard, why investing feels scary, or why success with money seems unfairly distributed, this book will change how you see everything. Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to learn is not just about money. It is about freedom, peace of mind, and designing a life where money works for you instead of controlling you. Once you understand the mindset behind money, you will never look at wealth the same way again. Chapter 1. Money is a behavior problem, not a math problem. Most financial advice focuses on formulas, rates of return, budgets, and compound interest tables. Those things matter, but they are not the hard part. The central difficulty with money is behavioral. Emotions, narratives, social comparisons, and inconsistent habits derail otherwise rational plans. If you accept this premise, the practical work shifts from seeking clever strategies to engineering environments and routines that make good financial behavior the default. Start by separating what is controllable from what is not. Income volatility, market returns, and macro shocks are noisy and often outside your direct control. Your savings rate, spending rules, and decision rituals are not. Prioritize the latter because small, persistent actions compound into outsized outcomes. The first concrete step is to install a savings-first architecture. Automate transfers the moment income arrives, so saving becomes an irreversible event rather than a moral debate at the checkout. Keep the automation simple and boring. A fixed percentage to an emergency or margin account, a percentage to long-term growth, and a small joy fund. The second step is to design friction to prevent emotionally driven spending. Use one of two practical tools: the 48-hour pause rule for discretionary purchases above a preset threshold, and the no saved card rule on retail sites to increase the cost of impulsive buys. Friction converts instant urges into deliberation without invoking willpower. Third, change comparisons into calibration. Social media and peer signaling create identity-driven consumption. Replace keeping up metrics with two personal standards: a runway metric measured in days of essentials and a capability metric measured in months or years of income-generating skill development. When these internal benchmarks feel healthy, social pressure diminishes. Fourth, embrace simplicity in investment philosophy. Complicated portfolios invite tinkering, which increases turnover, fees, and behavioral mistakes. For most people, A simple core of broad, low-cost holdings, augmented by a small sleeve for high-conviction ideas or learning experiments, is both effective and psychologically sustainable. Fifth, practice probabilistic thinking. Attach confidence ranges to forecasts and plan for multiple scenarios. When your base case is explicit and conservative, you react less to short-term volatility and more to data that updates your forecast. Finally, institutionalize learning through a decision ledger. Record major choices with the thesis, expected outcomes, and a post-mortem plan. Reviewing the ledger periodically converts experience into calibrated judgment and reduces repetition of the same mistakes. Money becomes manageable when you design systems that reward long-term choice alignment rather than rely on intermittent discipline. Behavior, routine, and modest structural changes win over clever mathematics because they are the repeated actions that compound into wealth. Chapter 2. The Power of Time and the Discipline of Small, Consistent Actions. Time is the single most powerful variable in finance. Compounding works quietly. Small advantages repeated over long horizons produce extraordinary outcomes. The practical implication is simple. Start early, be consistent, and protect your base capital. $1,000 invested early and left alone often outperforms much larger sums invested later and handled recklessly. Early action hedges against forecasting error because time magnifies mistakes into visible corrections and gives you opportunities to learn without ruin. Operationalize this principle by prioritizing margin and runway first. Before seeking alpha, ensure you have a liquid buffer size to your job volatility, 3 to 9 months of essentials depending on income stability. This runway turns life shocks into tactical adjustments rather than catastrophic depleters of long-term capital. Next, adopt automation not as a convenience, but as an enforcement mechanism for consistency. Dollar-cost averaging through automated investment buys removes the psychological trap of timing markets and forces you to capture volatility as opportunity. Then, practice the discipline of incremental increases. Choose a small, sustainable increase in savings rate, 1 or 2 percentage points, and schedule it quarterly or annually. Over years, these increments have material effect. Another durable habit is low-friction reinvestment. Whenever income increases, allocate a fixed fraction to savings and investments before adjusting lifestyle. This practice prevents lifestyle creep, the silent wealth killer. Time also sharpens behavior through cumulative learning. Treat each year as an iterative experiment on asset allocation, tax optimization, and risk management. Review outcomes annually to adjust conservative rules rather than chase last-year winners. Finally, remember psychological time horizon alignment. Match savings vehicles to goals. Short-term liquidity in accessible accounts, medium-term targets in conservative growth vehicles, and long-term retirement investments in tax-efficient structures. When time horizons align with instruments, you avoid forced liquidations and maximize compounding. Small, consistent actions under the discipline of time are more potent than searching for single heroic returns. Design your life so that time, not bravery, compounds your advantages. Chapter 3. Save like an owner. Margin, optionality, and the psychology of enough saving is not only about future spending, it is about creating optionality and psychological resilience today. The wealthy mind treats cash not as a mere leftover, but as a strategic asset that buys options, reduces pressure, and changes decisions. Begin by defining margin of safety in personal terms, a runway measured in days or months, sufficient to handle job loss, health shocks, or temporary business setbacks. Convert that abstract buffer into a dedicated account and protect it with clear withdrawal rules and a rebuild plan triggered by any use. Second, reframe saving as purposeful purchasing of future freedom. Every automated transfer is a micro-investment in optionality, the capacity to quit a toxic job, to weather a downturn, or to pursue a high-upside experiment. This narrative reduces the pleasure penalty of current restraint. Third, design a simple allocation for optionality capital, a margin bucket for liquidity, a growth bucket for long-term compounding, and a small experimentation or skill investment bucket to fund optionality that increases earning capacity. Keep the buckets visible and labeled. Visibility reinforces commitment. Fourth, practice enough thinking. Define what enough means across income levels and life stages. A target net worth that supports your chosen lifestyle with margin for surprise. This is not stinginess, but a deliberate stance that curbs endless escalation. To make enough operational, set 2 rules: a spending cap tied to a percentage of rising income, and a hedging rule that dedicates additional income to margin until the runway hits target. Fifth, cultivate a habit of buying on sale, mentally and financially. Distinguish between price and value and treat market volatility as a periodic discount on future options. When opportunities appear, optionality capital becomes the source of decisive action. Finally, protect the optionality mindset psychologically. Reduce comparison triggers, celebrate margin milestones, and publicly commit to a runway metric with one trusted partner for accountability. Saving as ownership of future freedom realigns daily choices with long-term optionality and converts restraint into the strategic creation of possibilities. Chapter 4. The Role of Stories. How Narratives Shape Financial Reality. Humans are story-driven creatures. We interpret numbers through narratives that make sense of ambiguity. Stories about risk, reward, heroes, and villains shape behavior far more than sterile spreadsheets. Recognizing this, the practical investor uses narratives deliberately rather than being passively shaped by social scripts. First, identify the dominant stories you consume about money: rags to riches mythology, get-rich-quick devices, or doom-laden market prophecies, and test them against data. Ask whether a popular story survives simple counterfactuals and whether it generalizes beyond a few anecdotes. Second, create personal stories that support prudent behavior. Replace anxious scarcity narratives with competence narratives. I build optionality through consistent saving, or I learn and experiment cheaply before scaling. Stories that focus on process over result reduce the emotional volatility that ruins financial plans. Third, be skeptical of stories that elevate agency without evidence. A charismatic entrepreneur's narrative is often persuasive because it offers a single causal hero. For investors, prefer systemic explanations that account for variance and luck. Fourth, use pre-mortem narratives as decision tools. Imagine an investment has failed badly. Tell the story of what went wrong and identify the early signs you should have observed. This reverse storytelling exposes hidden assumptions and sharpens stop rules. Fifth, control your narrative ecosystem. Curate media and peer groups to reduce exposure to high arousal stories that trigger reactive behavior. Seek long-form analysis and primary documents rather than short hot-take content engineered for clicks. Finally, remember that stories are instruments. You can craft a narrative to enforce good behavior. Share a simple personal money story publicly or with a partner to create accountability. When narratives are chosen intentionally, they shape decisions rather than hijack them. They convert ambiguous data into coherent actions aligned with long-term goals. Chapter 5. Risk, Luck, and the Humility to Plan for Many Futures. Risk is not the same as volatility. Risk is the possibility of permanent loss of options or ruin. Luck is the unseen force that creates winners and losers, irrespective of skill. The financially wise treat both with humility and structure. Start by defining ruin for your context: forced asset liquidation, uninsurable medical shocks, or catastrophic career derailment. Design buffers sized to the severity of each ruin scenario. Use insurance intelligently for tail risks: health, disability, and liability coverage where personal exposure is high. For business owners, separate personal and business liabilities with legal structures and conservative leverage. Second, acknowledge the role of luck in outcomes. When you succeed, practice attribution that credits both skill and favorable conditions. When you fail, look for structural lessons rather than purely personal blame. This balanced humility prevents overconfidence after good runs and paralysis after bad ones. Third, diversify sources of optionality rather than betting everything on a single thesis. Diversification here is not a surrender to mediocrity, but a strategy to preserve real optionality. Multiple income channels, geographic exposure, and time-bucketed investment allocations. Fourth, design stress tests and scenario exercises. Model extreme but plausible events: prolonged joblessness, market drawdowns, sudden regulatory shifts, and verify survival pathways without heroic assumptions. If a scenario breaks the plan, iterate conservative rules that close those failure modes. Fifth, calibrate leverage carefully. Leverage magnifies both returns and ruin probability. Prefer operational leverage, scaling a business model without proportionate capital increases, over financial leverage when possible. Finally, build psychological space to accept randomness. Create rituals that detach identity from short-term financial signals. Weekly reflections, a decision ledger, and a small trusted circle for perspective. The wise investor treats risk and luck as structural features of the world to be engineered around, not enemies to be vanquished. Planning for many futures with humility, buffers, and repeatable rules is the practical way to survive and thrive across unpredictable decades. Chapter 6. Budgeting that builds freedom, not guilt. Budgeting fails for most people because it is presented as punishment rather than as a tool for freedom. The first practical shift is to design budgets that allocate attention, not just money. Think of a budget as a decision map that expresses your priorities in advance so you are not negotiating them at the point of temptation. Start by creating 3 buckets with clear psychological roles: margin, growth, and joy. Margin is your runway and optionality capital. Growth funds investments in capabilities that raise future income or reduce recurring costs. Joy is the small, predictable pleasure budget that preserves morale and prevents binge spending. Automate transfers to each bucket the moment income arrives, so allocation becomes an irreversible act rather than a daily debate. Use percentages rather than fixed amounts at first. This scales automatically with raises and side income, and make the joy bucket non-trivial, because austerity without reward breeds rebellion. Next, replace the idea of strict line item control with decision rules that reduce cognitive load. Instead of tracking every grocery cent, set rules like cook at home 4 nights per week, buy groceries on a weekly list, and allow 1 flexible experiment meal per week. Rules like this preserve autonomy while producing predictable savings. Third, implement a simple cadence of review. A 5-minute weekly check where you mark whether the transfers occurred and note 1 friction point, and a monthly 30-minute session to adjust percentages if life circumstances changed. Small, regular reviews keep the system calibrated without becoming onerous. Fourth, Use visibility rituals to make progress emotionally real. Display your margin balance as runway days. Show growth bucket progress as skills purchased or courses completed, and tally joy expenditures in a visible tracker. Visibility converts abstract numbers into concrete rewards and sustains behavior. Fifth, design friction where it helps and remove it where it harms. Make discretionary spending slightly harder with a 48-hour pause and by removing saved card details. But make saving and investing purely automatic with one-click setups and recurring transfers. The best budgeting architectures hide the boring parts and expose the meaningful wins. Sixth, treat windfalls differently. Split any one-time money into the buckets with a higher allocation to margin and growth to prevent windfall frittering. Seventh, when lifestyle upgrades tempt you, create a two-step evaluation. Ask whether the upgrade increases capability or status. If it increases capability, commuting time saved that boosts productivity, tools that improve income, consider it. If it is status, require a higher bar and a 30-day waiting period. Eighth, keep a small experimental fund for learning and income projects so you can try new ways to grow without touching core capital. Ninth, communicate your budget rules to partners and close friends where appropriate. Shared expectations reduce interpersonal friction and convert financial discipline into a shared project rather than secret austerity. Finally, measure success not by deprivation, but by increased optionality and decreased anxiety. Is your runway longer? Are you more willing to say no to projects that do not align with your goals? Does saving feel less like punishment and more like buying peace? Budgeting that builds freedom shifts the narrative from scarcity to capability. It is not about clipping all pleasures, but about designing a life in which those pleasures are chosen, sustainable, and aligned with long-term liberty. Adopt these structural rules, and your financial plan becomes less a spreadsheet and more a system that expands your real choices every month. Chapter 7. Investing Psychology: How to Think Clearly. When markets are loud, markets amplify emotion because they compress many opinions into instantaneous prices. The investor's challenge is to preserve rationality when the environment is designed to provoke reactivity. Start by separating two kinds of noise: market noise that affects price but not underlying business value, and signal that genuinely alters expected cash flows. Train yourself to ask, does this event change the long-term cash generation of the assets I own? If not, ignore the noise. The next practical technique is to build decision rituals anchored in pre-specified criteria. Before investing in anything, write a one-page memo that states the thesis, the margin of safety you require, the maximum allocation, and a short list of disconfirming evidence that would force reassessment. Store this memo and only revisit it after a scheduled waiting period unless a material, documented event occurs. This ritual converts emotional responses into mechanical checks. Complement memos with a portfolio rule set. Core holdings that are meant to compound, a tactical sleeve for opportunities with defined time-boxed experiments, and a liquidity buffer to take advantage of dislocations. Don't confuse activity with intelligence. Many investors feel productive when they trade frequently, but excess turnover reduces net returns through fees, taxes, and behavioral slippage. Another psychological tactic is to cultivate an ignorance budget. Explicitly accept and document where you do not know enough to act, and refuse to speculate outside those bounds. This humility reduces action for action's sake. Use contrarian calibration cautiously. Buying when others panic is powerful, but it must be backed by evidence and margin of safety, not bravado. Chapter 8. Upgrade your money conversations. Communicate, negotiate, and align. Money problems are often communication problems in disguise. Whether with partners, family, or business colleagues, misaligned expectations and unstated assumptions create recurring conflicts and poor decisions. The remedy is practical. Convert vague feelings into explicit agreements. Begin by creating a short financial pact with key people. A one-page document that states shared goals, individual responsibilities, decision thresholds for large expenses, and a mechanism for dispute resolution. Use neutral language and focus on behaviors rather than blame. For couples, include rules for joint accounts, personal discretionary allowances, and an agreed plan for major purchases. This pre-framing prevents emotionally charged negotiations at critical moments. Next, learn negotiation as a systematic skill rather than a zero-sum fight. Prepare for financial negotiations, salary, vendor contracts, service providers, by listing your goals, acceptable trade-offs, and walk-away points. Practice anchoring with data, market salary ranges, competitor offers, and benchmark prices. Use simple tactics like asking open questions to discover counterpart constraints. Often, the most value is in uncovering what the other side needs more than in the initial price. Third, normalize money discussions regularly. Schedule a monthly 30-minute financial check-in that reviews runway, savings rates, and upcoming decisions. Regularity reduces friction because it moves the conversation from crisis mode to steady planning. Fourth, use objective metrics when possible, benchmarks for spending, target percentages for savings, and rules for debt reduction, so disagreements can be resolved by returning to agreed numbers. Fifth, practice transparency proportionate to the relationship. Share key metrics where trust exists and create safe channels for questions without judgment. Sixth, when teaching financial concepts to others, use simple analogies and concrete examples. Money literacy improves with tangible practice, not abstract lectures. Seventh, align incentives in work and partnerships. Define revenue sharing, performance metrics, and time-bound review clauses to prevent drift. Finally, cultivate a culture of mutual learning. Accept that all parties will make mistakes and commit to post-mortems that focus on lessons and corrective rules rather than blame. Upgrading money conversations creates predictable decision pathways, reduces stress, and turns financial coordination into a cooperative process that preserves relationships while improving outcomes. Chapter 9. Debt, Leverage, and the Discipline of Controlled Risk. Debt is a tool that can amplify outcomes in both directions. The practical rule is to treat leverage as optional ammunition rather than baseline financing. Start by categorizing debt into productive and non-productive forms. Productive debt funds investments that clearly increase future income or reduce recurring costs. Business investments with reliable payback. Mortgages at sensible loan-to-value ratios for owner-occupied properties in stable markets. Whereas non-productive debt funds consumption that does not improve future cash flows, such as high-interest consumer credit for depreciating goods. Prioritize paying down non-productive debt aggressively while treating productive debt with cautious optimization. Next, set firm leverage limits tied to stress scenarios. Define the worst-case income and market conditions you would realistically face and ensure debt service remains manageable under those conditions without liquidating core assets. This stress testing approach prevents optimistic assumptions from becoming ruinous when conditions change. Use simple rules for leverage scaling. Never increase total exposure after a significant gain. Instead, re-evaluate the thesis. When using margin or business loans, cap exposure and require higher margins of safety because volatility erodes buffers. Another discipline is liquidity management. Maintain contingency cash equal to several months of debt service to buy time during temporary shocks. If debt funds a business, ring-fence personal exposure and structure repayments hierarchically to prevent personal ruin in downturns. Refinancing can be useful, but avoid optimism about future rates. Prefer fixed-rate financing for long-duration commitments when uncertainty is elevated. For entrepreneurs, consider alternative financing like revenue-based funding or staged venture capital, where dilution and fixed costs are balanced. Finally, treat debt reduction as a strategic investment. The avoided interest is often the highest guaranteed return available after tax effects. Design an amortization plan that accelerates principal reduction when surplus cash appears and automates minimum payments. Leverage magnifies both gains and losses. Discipline, scenario planning, and clear rules convert debt from a gambler's risk into a managed instrument that increases resilience and optionality. Chapter 10. Building a money identity that sticks. Habits, rituals, and narrative reinforcement. Sustainable financial change requires identity work. Habits anchored to a self-concept are far more durable than rules imposed externally. Start by crafting a concise identity statement that captures who you want to be financially, short, affirmative, and behavior-focused. For example, I am someone who secures freedom through consistent saving, thoughtful investing, and purposeful spending. Repeat this statement in a brief morning ritual and link it to a micro-behavior, automated transfer, a 5-minute review, or recording a single financial metric. This linking creates a cue action loop that gradually converts behavior into identity. Second, use small, visible rituals that reinforce identity publicly when appropriate. Monthly updates to a trusted partner, a shared progress dashboard, or a brief public note when you reach a margin milestone. Public signals increase accountability and make identity changes social rather than solitary. Third, celebrate micro wins in modest ways to maintain morale. Small rewards from the joy bucket for hitting savings checkpoints prevent the sense of perpetual deprivation. Fourth, integrate habits into context cues. Specific places, times, and sequences that trigger financial behaviors automatically, such as reviewing budgets immediately after Sunday coffee or updating investment memos each Friday morning. Fifth, design failure-safe systems. When a habit lapses, have a quick repair routine, a 12-day restart plan, so small slips do not turn into regressions. Sixth, cultivate story practices that support identity. Write brief monthly reflections on what you learned, which choices aligned with your identity, and what to adjust. These reflections build narrative continuity and prevent reactive decisions. Seventh, mentor or teach one person. Explaining concepts consolidates belief and strengthens identity. Finally, measure progress with simple, honest metrics, not vanity statistics, but runway days, savings rate, and growth in optionality capital. Identity is not magic. It is the alignment of environment, ritual, and narrative. When these elements cohere, money behaviors become automatic expressions of who you are rather than moral battles you fight each week. Start with a single identity sentence, bind it to a tiny ritual, and let the compound of repeated action change not just your balance sheet, but your sense of self. Chapter 11. Income Design. Crafting multiple reliable earning engines. Income is the muscle that builds options. How you think about earning determines how much optionality you can create. The wealthy mind treats income as a system to be engineered rather than a fate to be endured. The practical work begins with a candid inventory. List every current source of income, estimate its reliability, its scalability, and the marginal hours required to grow it. Put each source into one of three bins: core dependable income, scalable optional income, and experimental income. The core is the salary or steady freelance work that pays the bills. Protect it because runway without cover is brittle. Scalable optional income is the part that can grow without a linear increase in your hours. Products, royalties, platform businesses, or passive-like investments. Experimental income is the exploratory sleeve for learning new markets or testing ideas. Treat it as R&D with a small budget and clear kill rules. Next, design deliberate routines to move capital and attention towards scalability. Pick one scalable idea and treat it like a small product sprint. Define a minimum viable offer you can create in 4 weeks, find 10 potential customers, and attempt to sell. If you get traction, reinvest profits into automation or distribution. If not, document the lessons and iterate. The power is compounding. A small scalable income stream that earns even modest returns can substitute for extra saving because it expands earning capacity rather than merely cutting expenses. Another practical discipline is to optimize bargaining for your core income systematically. Prepare a one-page case for value with documented outcomes, market salary data, and a 2-option proposal: an immediate compensation adjustment or a time-bound pilot to demonstrate added value with clear metrics. Negotiation is a repeatable process. Rehearse it, time-box it, and treat rejections as data. Third, create time arbitrage. Buy back hours where possible by spending on low-cost help for tasks that are necessary but non-unique: administration, bookkeeping, or simple production tasks. Reinvest that purchase time into higher value activities that grow earning engines. Fourth, diversify economic exposure intentionally. Multiple uncorrelated earning engines reduce the risk that one job loss forces the liquidation of long-term assets. This doesn't mean dozens of half-baked side gigs. It means 2 to 3 distinct income models that cover different failure modes: employment, a product or digital asset, and a consulting or freelance sleeve that can scale up during demand spikes. Fifth, treat pricing as a lever. Many people underprice early offers because of fear. Practice value-based pricing by focusing on outcomes delivered and willingness to pay rather than time input. Run short experiments where you quote a meaningful price and test the market response. Often you will discover that the psychological cost of higher pricing for buyers is lower than you assumed. Sixth, protect your earning identity. Reframe your view of layoffs, slow periods, or client churn as temporary signals to activate your optionality plan rather than a betrayal of your worth. Have a short contingency script that you can execute within 48 hours of income disruption. Immediate cash triage, an outreach blitz to prior clients, and a 2-week product push targeted at a known audience. Seventh, continuously invest in skills that increase your leverage. Writing that converts, basic productization skills, simple automation, and marketing fundamentals. Allocate a modest, recurring learning budget, time and money, and measure returns by the incremental income attributable to new skills each quarter. Eighth, institutionalize a reinvestment rule for incremental income. Commit a fixed percentage of any new earnings into scalable income development rather than lifestyle inflation. Finally, measure progress with a simple dashboard: monthly net income per active hour, runway adjusted for worst-case scenarios, and the percentage of income that is scalable. When you design income intentionally, you shift from scarcity to creation. Each deliberate step towards scalable earning converts time into optionality and resilience. And over years, that engineered income base is the primary determinant of financial freedom. Chapter 12. Entrepreneurship and Value Creation, Building Assets that Work Without You. Entrepreneurship is often glorified as a path to riches, yet the key distinction that matters for a money mindset is whether a venture builds transferable, durable value or simply trades your time for money. Think of entrepreneurship as asset creation. You are building engines that create value independent of your continuous presence. The first rule is to design for transferability from day one. Choose business models where processes can be documented, outcomes can be measured, and key activities can be delegated. Avoid structures that embed unique value solely in your daily manual input, unless your goal is a lifestyle practice rather than growth. Second, begin with a simple productization framework. Identify a repeatable service or capability you can standardize, package it into a clear deliverable, and price it for outcomes. Convert custom work into templates, SOPs, and minimal viable products that can be sold, licensed, or scaled. Third, prioritize customer economics. Understand your unit economics, customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, churn drivers, and aim to make the math attractive before scaling. Many small businesses fail because they confuse top-line growth with unit profitability. Run small, rapid experiments to optimize acquisition channels and to reduce time to first value for customers. Fourth, systematize decisions with a two-layer operating model. Core operating playbooks for daily operations and a strategic playbook for product evolution and capital allocation. Document both in concise one-pagers that any new hire can use to take action. Fifth, design governance early. Decide on ownership splits, decision rights, and capital deployment rules so that as the enterprise grows, decisions remain aligned with original incentives and the business doesn't cannibalize its own returns through impetuous expansion. Sixth, think about exit optionality from the start without letting it dominate strategy. Build the company to be excellent for customers and profitable for owners, which naturally creates options whether the path is ongoing stewardship or a sale. Seventh, hire for leverage, not ego. Bring on people who amplify your strengths and cover your weaknesses. Pay attention to onboarding and retention metrics because human capital is the durable engine in most small companies. Eighth, protect cash flow with staging rules. Avoid over-leveraging for growth and keep a contingency reserve sized to survive common client churn scenarios. Ninth, measure outcomes not by vanity metrics, but by clarity. Monthly recurring revenue, gross margin per customer, customer satisfaction leading indicators, and free cash flow. 10th, cultivate a founder's mindset that values product-market fit and durable economics over rapid vanity growth. Slow and profitable growth outlasts fast and fragile scaling. Entrepreneurship done with a money mindset builds assets that produce optionality and reduce dependence on your raw hours. Each structural step toward transferability increases the chance that the business will compound value rather than your exhaustion. Chapter 13. Investing with Intention, Asset Allocation, Fees, and the Psychology of Ownership. Investment returns are the product of allocation decisions, costs, and psychological steadiness. The disciplined investor thinks first about the allocation strategy that aligns with goals and temperament, and second about minimizing fees and friction that erode compounding. Start by mapping goals to time horizons, short-term needs in accessible cash, medium-term goals in conservative growth, and long-term retirement in growth-oriented, tax-efficient vehicles. Use broad, low-cost core holdings for the long horizon, diversified index, or simple rules-based portfolios. If you lack concentrated, high-conviction ideas, supplement with a small sleeve of active, higher conviction positions if you possess demonstrable edge. Next, brutalize fees. Compare expense ratios, transaction costs, and tax drag across options. Small percentage differences compound into large absolute sums over decades. For most investors, a minimalist core plus a curated active sleeve yields the best trade-off between performance potential and behavioral sustainability. Then, design an allocation ritual. Set rebalancing thresholds, automate contributions, and avoid frequent tinkering. Rebalancing enforces buy-low discipline and captures volatility as a friend, but doing it mechanically reduces emotional interference. Third, understand the ownership psychology. Treat shares as fractional ownership in businesses and ask whether price movements change fundamental cash flow prospects. If not, ignore day-to-day noise. Fourth, tax efficiency matters. Use tax-advantaged accounts correctly, harvest losses thoughtfully, and prefer long-term holding structures where appropriate. Fifth, protect against behavioral leakage by limiting access to trading platforms during decision windows and by batching review meetings. Sixth, maintain a playbook for new opportunities. A one-page memo, a required margin of safety percentage, and position sizing rules tied to conviction. Seventh, evaluate performance net of fees and realistic benchmarks. Attribute returns to skill versus luck and adjust allocation accordingly. Eighth, practice humility. When you lack an edge, favor diversified, low-cost exposures. When you have an edge, concentrate within systematic sizing rules. Finally, measure success by progress toward goals, not short-term outperformance. Asset allocation is a process that converts risk preferences and time into outcomes. When combined with low fees and psychological discipline, it becomes the reliable backbone of financial freedom. Chapter 14. Protecting Wealth. Insurance, legal structures, and practical safety nets. Protection is an active part of wealth creation rather than mere prudence. The wealthy mind treats insurance, legal architecture, and contingency planning as investments in resilience. Begin with the basics: adequate health, disability, and liability coverage sized to your liabilities and risk exposure. For high-exposure professions or business owners, umbrella policies and professional indemnity insurance are often essential, inexpensive shields against catastrophic loss. Next, use legal separation to limit personal exposure. Use appropriate business entities. Keep business and personal finances distinct, and formalize agreements for partners and contractors to prevent ambiguity that leads to litigation. Estate planning is part of protection. A simple will, beneficiary designations, and basic trust structures can prevent forced liquidation and family conflict while preserving compounding over generations. Third, automate emergency liquidity rules. Maintain a margin account sized to realistic multi-month stress scenarios and ensure access to credit lines for business operations without invoking personal guarantees where possible. Fourth, understand contract hygiene. Read vendor and partnership agreements carefully, include clear termination clauses, and avoid open-ended guarantees that transfer asymmetric risk to you. Fifth, plan for cyber and identity risk by adopting simple hygiene, separate passwords, two-factor authentication, and basic operational backups for critical accounts and records. Sixth, rehearse continuity plans for key life events, a sudden health shock, a business disruption, or a severe market drawdown, so your responses are scripted and calm rather than improvised panic. Seventh, consider family governance. If you have dependents, document guardianship wishes, financial support plans, and small education funds to prevent immediate distress. Finally, view protection as enhancing optionality. The point of insurance and legal structures is not fear mitigation alone, but enabling you to take calculated risks that compound returns without threatening ruin. Chapter 15. Money and Meaning. Aligning wealth with purpose, giving, and a life well-lived. Wealth detached from meaning is hollow. The mature money mindset integrates financial competence with purpose. Start by asking what freedom truly means to you: time, choice, security, or impact, and design financial goals that translate those values into measurable targets. Use money to purchase capabilities and experiences that align with your prioritized life script, not to chase status signals that fade quickly. Next, adopt a structured giving plan that reflects both your values and effectiveness. Choose a giving vehicle: donor-advised fund, direct giving, or sustained program support, and apply the same discipline you use for investing. Set hypotheses about outcomes, measure impact where possible, and iterate. Philanthropy done methodically amplifies both social return and personal fulfillment. Third, create rituals that use wealth to strengthen relationships and values. Annual family retreats to review goals, small recurring gifts that seed community projects, or time-bound sabbaticals that enforce reflection. Fourth, balance accumulation with presence. Schedule money-free times where you practice activities that remind you why money matters: learning, service, and cultivating relationships, so wealth becomes an instrument, not a master. Fifth, plan legacy in living terms. Mentor successors, document lessons learned, and institutionalize charitable commitments that persist beyond your active stewardship. Sixth, practice gratitude and humility publicly. Share lessons with peers and younger people to reduce secrecy and increase collective learning. Finally, measure success beyond net worth. Track freedom days, months of runway, hours per week devoted to meaningful work, and the measurable outcomes of your giving. When money is aligned with purpose, it becomes a multiplier of human flourishing rather than a source of anxiety. The money mindset matures when competence meets compassion, when strategy supports values, and when accumulation serves freedom and contribution rather than mere accumulation for its own sake. Start this week by defining one purpose-based financial goal and take a single actionable step toward it. The compound of small, value-aligned choices is the richest investment you can make. Chapter 16. Financial Resilience. Building Mental and Practical Fortitude. Financial resilience is the discipline of surviving shocks without surrendering long-term progress. It is both a mental skill and an operational system. Mentally, resilience begins with a calibrated view of uncertainty. You accept that bad things will happen and design small, repeatable responses in advance, so emotion does not drive crisis decisions. Practically, begin by sizing your runway to your true risk exposure. A freelancer with irregular income needs a larger runway than a salaried employee with stable benefits. Calculate runway in days of essential expenses rather than vague months to make the risk tangible. Next, create a two-layer contingency system. The first layer is immediate liquidity, enough to cover essentials for a short shock. The second layer is optionality capital, a liquid reserve allocated to strategic moves. Buy time to find a better job, invest in relearning, or buy an asset at a depressed price. Automate the creation of both layers through separate accounts with clear withdrawal rules. Emergency account for immediate use with strict rebuild rules. Optionality account for opportunistic actions with explicit deployment criteria. Stress test these accounts annually with realistic scenarios: sudden income loss, medical crisis, or prolonged market downturn, and verify that your response scripts keep you solvent and psychologically calm. Another structural habit is expense modularity. Classify monthly obligations into essential fixed, essential variable, and discretionary buckets, and design easy knobs to reduce variable and discretionary spending quickly without destroying dignity. Suspend streaming subscriptions, shift to cheaper telecom plans, or temporarily downscale commuting costs. Emotional resilience also requires rehearsal. Run tabletop exercises where you simulate a real shock and follow the written scripts for 12 days. Practice reduces paralysis when the real event occurs. The social dimension matters too. Cultivate a small support circle who know your contingency plan and can offer practical help. Social capital often fills gaps financial plans cannot. Operationally, reduce dependency on single sources of income through active diversification, side consulting, passive digital products, or a small rental, so a loss in one stream reduces overall risk. Finally, prioritize psychological hygiene. Maintain a morning routine that stabilizes mood. Practice brief daily reflection that separates facts from stories, and use a decision ledger so choices in crisis remain evidence-based. Resilience is not about eliminating failure. It is about preserving the capacity to respond well. Build systems that buy you time, reduce cognitive load during stress, and allow you to transform shocks into manageable tactical problems rather than existential disasters. Chapter 17. Social Capital and Financial Leverage. Networks that create opportunity. Money multiplies when knowledge, access, and reputation flow alongside capital. Social capital, trusted relationships, credible signals, and reciprocal favors, beats isolated effort more often than talent or luck alone. The first practical step is to audit your network flows. Who do you regularly exchange value with? What types of value? Information, introductions, skills, flow, and where are the gaps relative to your financial goals? Convert this audit into a monthly networking plan with 3 simple actions. 1 learning conversation with a domain expert, 1 small help you offer to someone in your network, and 1 public artifact that shares insight and raises your signal. The second habit is reciprocity, first outreach. When you ask for introductions or favors, lead with a concrete way to help first. Share a useful resource, make a warm introduction, or offer a short free consultation. Reciprocity creates durable ties and reduces the risk of transactional burnout. Third, create standards for high-value interactions. Prefer deep 30-minute calls over shallow group chats. Prepare a short agenda that clarifies outcomes, and always follow up with a concise note that includes an action or resource. Fourth, curate tiny public projects that broadcast competence and attract inbound opportunities. Short case studies, a consistent newsletter, or a 1-page synthesis of a learning experiment. These artifacts act as magnets for partners, clients, and mentors. Fifth, formalize an advisory habit. Maintain a small circle of peers for quarterly problem solving and a rotating mentor who gives strategic feedback. Peer groups provide accountability and reduce echo chamber risk because members at similar stages spot blind spots faster. Sixth, invest in reputation bandwidth by contributing to communities, not for immediate return, but because reputation compounds. Teaching, writing, and consistent collaboration build trust that later converts into deals, terms of trade, and privileged opportunities. Seventh, protect your network by honoring commitments. Do what you say when you say it, and under-promise, over-deliver. Reputation erodes faster than it builds, and small reliability failures cost disproportionate trust. Finally, measure social capital with simple metrics. inbound introductions per quarter, number of useful mentor interactions, and conversion rate of network leads to opportunities. Social capital is not a soft luxury, it is practical leverage. When combined with optionality capital and disciplined execution, networks turn ideas into scalable income and turn scarcity into repeated invitations to better deals. Chapter 18. Modern Tools and Automation. Use technology to reduce decision friction. Technology amplifies discipline when used to automate low-value decisions and to surface high-quality signals. The first principle is friction engineering. Automate the boring stuff and protect your high-attention windows for strategic work. Automate transfers to savings and investment accounts the moment income arrives. Use rules-based rebalancing to maintain desired allocations without constant oversight. Use bill pay and recurring transfers to remove missed payments and late fees from your decision matrix. The second principle is signal curation. Replace sensational news feeds with a curated dashboard that only alerts on fundamental changes to your active positions or household financial health. Cash runway below threshold, significant portfolio drawdown beyond set bands, or tax deadline reminders. Third, adopt simple auditable templates for decisions. A one-page investment memo, a short vendor selection checklist, and an emergency withdrawal procedure. Use cloud-synced documents and version control so decisions have an auditable trail. Fourth, choose tools that support learning and income scaling. Lightweight course platforms for productizing knowledge, simple e-commerce checkout systems for small digital goods, and automation stacks that connect customer intake to fulfillment. Test tools with small experiments and kill ones that increase noise rather than signal. Fifth, protect digital hygiene aggressively. Use a password manager, enable two-factor authentication, and maintain secure backups of crucial financial documents. A single compromised account can create months of operational friction and anxiety. Sixth, use micro-analytics to guide small improvements. Time to first response for clients, marginal cost per sale for experiments, and a dashboard of learning progress for new skills. Data narrows choices and reduces the emotional drama of should I change course? Seventh, automate learning habits. Schedule weekly reading blocks, subscribe to curated technical summaries, and set reinforced reminders that nudge practice. Technology can both waste attention and amplify disciplined routines. Treat it as an extension of process design rather than a substitute for judgment. Chapter 19. Life Cycle Financial Design. Matching strategy to stage financial priorities shift across life stages, and durable plans adjust rather than rewrite. Early career focus should prioritize optionality, skill development, runway, and small scalable experiments, because time can fix mistakes and compounding begins early. Mid-career often centers on asset growth, optimizing tax-advantaged accounts, increasing scalable income, and beginning strategic allocations to long-term insurance or estate scaffolding. Later career shifts toward preservation, predictable income streams, and legacy design. The practical approach is to map a 5-year rolling plan tied to concrete metrics: target savings rate, scalable income percentage, tax optimization steps completed, and estate milestones achieved. Every year, rotate one major focus area to maintain momentum. Year 1 skill build, Year 2 optionality deployment, Year 3 tax/estate setup. Another habit is to adopt modular vehicles for each horizon: highly liquid accounts for short-term needs, intermediate conservative growth for medium-term goals, and tax-efficient retirement or annuitization strategies for long-term income. Consider social commitments and caregiving obligations as scheduled variables. plan buffers for expected family costs, and align insurance to protect household stability. For entrepreneurs, plan exit optionality with milestone gates that determine whether to scale, sell, or steward the enterprise. For investors, gradually shift risk exposure as capital grows and personal human capital becomes less fungible. Finally, practice decadal reflection. Every 10 years, synthesize outcomes, update values, and publicly document lessons for heirs or partners. Life cycle design preserves freedom at each stage by aligning risk, liquidity, and meaning with actual responsibilities. Chapter 20. Teaching Money. How to instill financial competence in others. The final long-term multiplier is transmission. Teaching money to children, partners, or mentees creates compounding benefits beyond your lifetime. Start with simple narratives that emphasize process over destinations, saving as buying options, investing as ownership, and modest living as strategic choice. Use concrete projects, a small custodial account for teens with a simple matching rule for savings, a family budget meeting that rotates facilitation, or a joint microbusiness project where a young person experiences customer discovery and revenue. Normalize mistakes by creating safe, small-risk learning environments. Allow a small loss in a supervised experiment, so the lesson is anchored in experience, not fear. Build habit scaffolds, a weekly money check-in, a short reading assignment followed by a teach-back, and simple decision templates for major purchases. Use stories from family history to teach trade-offs and values related to money. Narratives stick where lectures fail. For partners or spouses, align on a shared financial identity statement and a short conflict resolution ritual that prevents money fights from derailing strategy. For children, prioritize financial autonomy in age-appropriate ways. Chores for small earning, simple savings goals, and public praise for good decisions. Finally, institutionalize transfer rituals, annual letters, a family financial handbook, or a small learning scholarship that carry values and practical knowledge forward. Teaching money turns private competence into a civic good. It multiplies impact by creating more citizens who manage risk, preserve capital, and use wealth to expand opportunity. Conclusion. A one-page action plan to start today. If you take nothing else, start with a one-page plan that translates insight into immediate action. On the top line, write your primary financial value: freedom, security, impact. Below that list, 3 tactical commitments for the next 90 days. An automated savings rule, 1 scalable income experiment with a staged budget and kill rule, and 1 resilience action, runway calculation plus a contingency account. Add 2 behavioral rules: a 48-hour pause on discretionary purchases above a set threshold, and a weekly 30-minute decision ledger review. Finally, commit to 1 social step, 1 mentor conversation, and 1 public artifact that shares a learning from your experiment. Implement these steps now, measure outcomes, and treat results as data, not final judgment. Financial freedom is methodical work, not magic. Repeat the cadence, iterate slowly, and let small, consistent choices compound into the life you intend.